question that I'm asking today is, could online voting, voting on the internet, an internet-based voting system, could that save the 2020 election? Is it even a good idea? Is it something that people would entertain? Look, I think that there's little doubt in people's minds that we're headed for real trouble with this election. A lot of people concerned that there may be violence as a result of the election. Many people are concerned about whether the results will be accurate. All kinds of different issues going on. It really could be a tipping point for this country. It's really a very serious matter at this point with everything else going on. And one of the questions I asked is, look, in terms of the legitimacy of the election, what happens if the results are questioned, whether it's by Trump or by Biden? What if there's not an agreement that the results are something that can be relied on? What's going to happen then? And we already know that the results are going to be questioned because both sides have teams of lawyers already lined up and they're filing different things in court and already getting postured up to take this thing to court. And now we've got this added situation where Trump is saying, look, I'm not going to fund the post office. You got Democrats pushing for mail-in voting because they're doing that under the guise of safety for the COVID virus. And then Trump comes in and he says, you know what? I'm not going to provide the funding for post office overtime, some $36 billion they're asking for in overtime pay or additional help for the post office. Trump says, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to support it. With all that going on, last week on the podcast, the Christopher Scott Show podcast, I brought up this idea of, could online voting be used as a basis to save this whole election? And would it be worthwhile for something for Trump to entertain and maybe possibly do via executive order? And look, I want to be clear. I'm not talking about, going to vote.com and clicking a couple of boxes and calling that a vote. There'd have to be some serious security around this. And what I suggested was at least a two-step authentication process. And I think that the authentication process has to tie the person back to something tangible. And to that end, I said, hey, why not tie it back to a tax return? Because not many people file fake tax returns. There are some that are filed so that people can get fraudulent refunds. But how many people are going to put that are doing that, are going to put that together to also file a fraudulent vote? Well, maybe some. There's guaranteed that on some level there's going to be some fraud with any system. And there's a lot of concerns about who's going to be showing up at the polls physically and who's going to be mailing in these ballots if there's really a person behind it. Are they really a citizen? Are they really somebody that's allowed to vote? A lot of questions about all that. How's that any different with online voting? How's it any less secure than any of those processes? I think it's actually more secure if you do it properly. And I would say, look, this isn't going to be for everybody. Not everybody's going to want to vote online. That's fine. They can go vote in person as they have in the past. Some people may not be able to get through the authentication process or the registration process, you could say. And I think that the registration would have to be done in advance. And I think that, anybody who falls through the cracks and all that would still have the ability to show up and vote in person. And the last step in all that, I think there needs to be an ironclad audit of the whole thing. Somebody to go back and verify that these Social Security numbers or this name matches up with whatever it needs to match up to in order for a proper and bona fide election to take place. So I threw this idea out on the podcast last week to see what people would say about it. And I said, hey, look, I'd like to get your feedback. I said to the listeners. And I started getting responses back almost immediately. And I was blown away, absolutely blown away. The responses were 100% positive, 100% supportive, I should say positive, 100% supportive of the idea of online voting. I was shocked, I thought at least there'd be some people that, didn't support the idea. Now, people did add to that, well, it'd have to be secure. Of course it would have to be secure. Like I said, we're not going to just throw some check boxes on vote.com and call that election. That's not how it's going to work. So I think the big question in all this, if you look at everything that's going on, everything's going digital, right? Schools, colleges, something I talked about a long time ago. Everybody said it was crazy. I was talking about online colleges at least 2 years ago, and everybody said I was nuts. Now I'm talking about online voting. So we'll see. Maybe I'm 2 years ahead of the curve. I don't know, but I think it's a real bona fide way to do this. And the question then is, with everything else going digital, with everything in our world going digital, why isn't anybody else talking about this at all? There's no debate. There's no suggestion. There's no talk about how could we solve any particular problems that might be a hurdle in the way of this. I would say to you, look, if online voting was a way to steal the election, there would have been politicians that would have already tried to do it. You know what I'm saying? And they're not doing that. So that brings back this question, why not? Even if it was completely illegitimate, you would have some politician looking to capitalize on that, or some group of politicians, or maybe one of the parties. And we're not seeing that. Nobody's talking about it at all. Why is it not even being considered as an option? And I would say to you that the answer to that is because the parties don't want online voting. Why would the parties not want online voting? I believe it would actually be harder for them to manipulate. Let me tell you a little secret formula for politics. I don't care whether you're liberal or conservative. This is the reality. When the politicians are agreeing, when the parties are agreeing that people are getting screwed, that's a fact. Every time they go, oh, Republicans and Democrats agree, you better look out and you better run for your wallet. And right now, there's an agreement, although not spoken because they don't have to. Their consent in this case is through silence. Both parties are not supporting online voting. They're in agreement on that. That shows me that people ought to be really concerned and maybe ought to be really looking at it. I think that it's time to let the people be heard. And I think that improving voting and modernizing voting, look, there's people in every country around the world. I know we're talking about the United States, but we've always been a beacon of freedom. We've always been a beacon of democracy, and maybe it's time to do that in 2020 as well. Right now, in the midst of this so-called pandemic, maybe it's time for the United States to stand up and say, this is the way you run an election, even in the middle of a pandemic. Look, there's people that, whether they're in remote places, maybe they got to travel 20, 30 minutes, an hour to get to a polling location one way, and then they got to vote and they got to get back. And if you got a kids and a family and a job, all these things become very difficult. And even under normal conditions, even under completely normal conditions, elections in the United States, number one, they have a very low turnout. Number two, they're heavily weighted in favor of retirees and government worker unions. Why is that? Well, because retirees automatically have the day off, and government worker unions, with the exception of some essential personnel, typically have it as a contract day off for election day. And so for business people, for working Americans, it becomes very difficult to balance all these other demands. On a Tuesday, no less. Those businesses are open for business on Tuesday. So you get all these different people in old age homes, people in hospitals, not able to go to a polling location. What do we do about all that? And then you look at that scenario around the world and you say, you know what? This really makes some sense. Now some people say, well, that's what absentee ballots are for. True. Why couldn't it be done online? If it can be done by mail, it can be done online. I'd like to hear what you have to say about it. I think it's an idea worth considering. And the fact that nobody's talking about it tells me that maybe we should be talking about it. What do you think about it? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. In the meantime, if you're looking for a good conservative podcast, you might want to check out the Christopher Scott Show at ChristopherScottShow.com. You can listen right on the podcast on the website. You don't need an app. You don't need to sign up for anything. Just go on there, click podcast, click play, and you can hear what I have to say about the issues today and every day. 5 days a week, the Christopher Scott Show at ChristopherScottShow.com. And I want to tell you something unique about the podcast. I like to say it's one of the most widely known independent podcasts. What does that mean? Well, most of the big podcasts out there have aligned themselves with a party and advertisers and a producer and maybe a syndicator and all these different people that start to weigh in and tell the broadcaster what they have to talk about and how they need to talk about it. Heavily influenced. I don't care if it's radio or TV, some more than others, but all to some degree. Pressure from advertisers, pressure from producers, pressure from syndicators, all this pressure. I don't have that problem. I made a decision. I'm not going to monetize the podcast because I want to be able to speak my mind and I want to be free to speak the truth. I wanted to be able to be free to say what I wanted to say. And there was one big catch. I made a promise to myself, a commitment to myself, that I would never say anything that I regret. And coming up on 3 years, that's been the case. I hope you check it out. ChristopherScottShow.com. Let me know what you think about online voting in the comments below. If you like this video and you want to hear more, click the subscribe button, and I'll see you back here soon. Have a great day.
Warning, this podcast includes unapologetic logic and reason and may not be suitable for all audiences. In a world full of nonsense, he's been called the voice of uncommon common sense. He sees the abnormal that many find normal. Author and award-winning speaker, he is Chris